No discussion of power or corruption leading to what our founders thought, other than the de Medicis. Let's take a look at them.
For over a century, one family had run the city of Florence. They had carved their name into the heart of the Florentine Renaissance. The Medici. But at the height of their success, they had been toppled by a sudden revolution. Now, two cousins, raised as brothers, struggled to resurrect the supremacy of their family. And the heirs to this once great dynasty were cast into exile. Giulio de' Medici had been ordained a priest and a prior. One step ahead, his cousin Giovanni was already a cardinal. But their clerical connections meant little without the power base of Florence. After 9 years in exile, Giovanni and Giulio de' Medici arrived in Rome. They took their case to the highest level of the church. Pope Julius II was also from a powerful family. Fortunately, he was sympathetic to the plight of the Medici. Now, he helped them assemble an army of their own, which headed back for Florence. By 1512, thousands of heavily armed soldiers were inside the borders of Tuscany and closing in on Florence. They were shadowed by the Medici cousins, determined to reclaim their city. The people of Florence prepared for the onslaught to come. But they knew they were hopelessly outnumbered. The leaders of the city called on their chief advisor, a political genius who had guided the Republic since the expulsion of the Medici. His name was Niccolò Machiavelli. Machiavelli was a single-minded patriot determined to defend the city from Medici dictatorship. Now he set to work. Mobilizing thousands of men from towns and villages all across Tuscany, Machiavelli assembled and equipped a national army. The papal soldiers were carving a bloody path through Italy. Soon, they reached Prato, a fortified town just outside Florence. Witnesses recorded the devastation perpetrated in the name of the Medici.
They broke through the wall and began to race through the town, where there was no longer any resistance, but only cries, violence, blood, and killing.
Machiavelli's soldiers stood no chance. The sack of Prato was a bloodbath. Giovanni sent a progress report to his master, the Pope.
The capture of Prato, so speedily and cruelly achieved, although it has given me pain, will at least serve as an example and a deterrent to the others.
The massacre of Prato had the intended effect. Just a few miles away in Florence, the leaders of the Republic surrendered. Through violence and terror, the Medici had won control of their city, but not the loyalty of the people of Florence. Before long, Giovanni received dramatic news. His mentor and master, Pope Julius II, was dead. In time-honored tradition, the cardinals were all called to Rome. It was their job to elect a new pope. After a whole week of deliberation, the cardinals were still undecided. But the reduction of the daily meal to a single unappetizing dish finally focused their thoughts. And the most senior cardinal, Giovanni, would cast a deciding vote. And it was his privilege to announce the winner. From now on, Cardinal Giovanni de' Medici would be known as Papa Leone X, Pope Leo X.
Giovanni was a fun lover. He loved drinking, he loved hunting. The moment he was made Pope, he wrote a letter to one of his brothers saying, "God has given the papacy to us, let us enjoy it."
Pope Leo X hosted elaborate dinners night after night. One ambassador sent a breathless letter home.
The meal was exquisite. There was an endless succession of dishes, for we had 65 courses.
Giovanni de' Medici had risen higher than any of his ancestors. Within just 1 year of his extravagant lifestyle, he had emptied the papal coffers. Soon, Leo X owed money to every bank in Rome. Behind the scenes, Giulio was pawning the papal jewels. So Leo turned to the source of income only available to the Pope himself: the sale of forgiveness.
He started selling what are called papal indulgences. And these are basically pieces of paper which give you remission from sins. So if you've been naughty in some respect, the Pope would sell you an indulgence which would remit your sins, it would cleanse your sins.
Leo wasn't the first Pope to sell indulgences, but he sold them on an unparalleled scale. But for one man, a German monk named Martin Luther, they were a step too far.
Luther was absolutely horrified by what the church was doing, and for him it symbolized everything that was corrupt and decadent about the Catholic Church.
In 1517, Martin Luther published an incendiary manifesto for change. Exploiting the latest technology, it was printed, reprinted, circulated, and translated. No idea had ever traveled so far and so fast. Luther's 95 Theses was an indictment on the sale of salvation and a direct attack on the Pope.
The Pope is richer than Croesus. He would do better to sell St. Peter's and give the money to the poor. When money clinks in the money chest, it can only increase greed and avarice. Those who believe they can be certain of salvation because they have bought indulgences will be eternally damned.
No one had ever dared use such outspoken language against the might of the Catholic Church. It was the start of a revolution.
Luther was trying to reform the church, not destroy it. But in the process, things snowballed and went completely out of control.
In 1521, Leo X suddenly died. The high-rolling Medici pontiff had been killed by a simple winter chill. His cousin Giulio was left to deal with the mounting problem. And within 2 years, Giulio de' Medici was crowned Pope Clement VII. The new pope inherited a continent in crisis. The fallout from Luther's Reformation now brought furious armies to the gates of Rome itself. But to the men surrounding Rome, there was nothing that remained sacred about the Catholic Church. Many were followers of Luther, now fueled by deep religious hatred.
Most of the soldiers were of German origin and nationality, therefore Lutherans. So they considered Rome as the new Babylon, the new city of sin, which is the seat of the Antichrist.
In fear of his life, Clement fled to the safety of the Castel Sant'Angelo. And his fears were justified. For the next day, Rome was torn apart without mercy.
And thus we set the stage for the divine right kings. But evil, as is social redemption in a society, is very difficult to uproot once established. The ramifications of this lie extended long past Martin Luther's unintended revolt. In fact, the doctrine of social redemption was thoroughly rejected by every founding fathers, no exceptions, because it set the stage for what they considered the greatest scourge against humanity. Secular historians often refer to the divine right kings as Europe's religious wars. That is a travesty of intellectualism. For the conflict at its core was the humanist state against the reformers, the moral agents of personal liberty. And from this conflict, we will find out many things, not the least of which we'll note it's the first time men rose up against a global tyranny. And we'll come away with the understanding of Jefferson's real meaning behind separation of church and state. So join me next time on the next installment of The Divine Right Kings Experiment.